Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's Chasing Giants podcast, episode 269 on April 20th. Happy Easter, Don.
Happy Easter, Terry. This is the day that all Christians look to as the basis for our faith. Jesus rose from the dead, and if there was anybody needing proof that he was who he said he was, this was the day it happened.
Right. It's a special day for all of us. I know a lot of people focus on kids' candy, getting dressed up all pretty for church or whatever, but today is such a vital part of everything that we believe in and our foundation of not only this podcast, but our lives, our businesses, and we just encourage everyone to really focus on what today is really about. Obviously, we want to have time with our family and enjoy maybe even a little turkey hunting, you never know. But today's about a celebration of Jesus and what he did for us. It was not a pretty event getting to this point. You got to realize there was 3 days of pure agony that came to him rising from the dead. But what a special day.
Amen.
So we're going to have a kind of a little bit more long drawn out segment today, and I'm going to tell everybody why. You started a series of social media posts earlier this week on genetics, nutrition, and age structure, and which is the most important. And we're going to spend almost the whole second segment of the show talking about that and saving a little bit of time. So make sure you tune in for it. Ty Miller is going to be doing our Sunday night prayer time at the end of the episode, which he had a big scare with his wife with health issues this week. So continued prayers for him. But before we get to the Osseo spot, you had a rough week. You just had to lay Robin's mother to rest and didn't get a whole lot done, but please extend our condolences to Miss Robin.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so Robin and I have been blessed to have all our parents living and still married to each other. And there's probably not very many couples our age whose parents were all alive and all still married to each other. And we were extremely blessed, but Robin's mother broke her ankle. Actually, it was on Robin's birthday, April 3rd. And she went in the hospital and they had surgery. And the best we can tell is that due to the, putting her out for the surgery, that she got something in her lungs and she got pneumonia, and it was downhill from there. And the time she was in the hospital, I was there 4 times, and each time she was just a little worse than the time before. But on Monday, she passed, and then we had the funeral yesterday, which was Friday. I think of all the positive things that I could say about my mother-in-law, and the number one thing that she did for me personally was she raised her daughter in a Christian home. And I know when I first started dating Robin, she was still living at home, and her mom was taking her to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday evening, every Wednesday evening. And there was no doubt that if Robin was living in that house, she was going to church. And actually, when I started dating Robin, I was going to church with them a lot too, because Robin had to be there and I wanted to be with Robin, so I was there. So there's no doubt where Robin's mother, Sharon, is at today. She's dancing on streets of gold, I have no doubt. But just a fine lady, lots of positive things I could say about her, but number one is she raised her daughter in a Christian home, and for that, I'll be forever grateful. Some people might have seen my social media post. The fact that she was such a devout Christian follower of Jesus Christ, it has an impact on my family for generations. My kids, my grandkids are going to feel the impact, and are today feeling the impact of what Robin's mother did, because if I would have married a woman that did not come from a Christian home and was not a strong Christian herself, very well today maybe not a Christian at all. Now, I had the seed planted in me early, but my faith probably was not strong enough for me to do it on my own. And I think God brought Robin and I together, and together we've kind of build off of each other and our faith. And she helps me to be more open with my faith and vice versa. So Robin's mother had a huge impact on my family beyond me, to my kids and my grandkids. So for that, I'll be forever grateful.
Yeah. Makes you think is how can I make that same impact on my kids and my grandkids by how I act or what I do? Something to think about sometimes. We sit and we reflect on how special certain people meant to us, but then don't really put that into practice and say, how can I be that person? So as Easter is here and you guys are listening, maybe something as a takeaway to the podcast, non-deer hunting related. We've produced a lot of videos here in the last 2 weeks for Chasing Giants TV. So there's been all kinds of videos, usually 2 to 3 a week on the Chasing Giants YouTube channel. So I hope you guys are checking those out. Some of them are getting quite a bit of engagement. Some of it's kind of funny, but it's engagement nonetheless. So we appreciate it. But we got an interesting week of videos ahead, and one of them kind of coincides with a project I have on my farm. So all of my trees arrived. They've been in a cooler, so they're sitting dormant. And I'm going to be planting those this week in between taking Joe and Al turkey hunting. And simultaneously, you have a video, a 2-part video we're going to make into one about planting trees that you recorded. So it's probably been about a week and a half since you recorded those, but I thought it would be good since not only I'm doing the project, but I'm sure other people are too. Walk us through the cliff notes of what's in that video about planting trees. That way people can go out and watch this video as it gets released later this week.
Yeah, but the video that I produce is more geared towards fruit trees specifically instead of just trees in general. And I've really come to love fruit orchards on my farm, and I had one for a number of years, and it is a great spot especially during the early season in the rut, and I wanted to build on that. And so the last 2 springs I've created 2 more fruit orchards. Last year I created one that's got about 40 trees in it, and this year one with about 30 trees in it. I call them clover plots on steroids because we start with a clover plot, a plot that gets plenty of sunlight for trees and such. But then we enhance that clover plot with some fruit trees that are planted on the proper spacing, which I'll go over on the video, talk about how to protect them and how to get them off to the best start possible. And I'm not one to be out there manicuring, pruning, whatever, spraying fruit trees. I baby them the first year, give them a little bit of attention the second year, and after that it becomes survival of the fittest. They're either going to make it or they're not. And if they're not, I just assume they die right away so I can stick another one in its place and get it going. But these fruit orchards, and especially since Andy and Jay have come up with these apple varieties that they're selling, these varieties, I keep talking about this, and I feel like I'm repeating myself, but guys, if you ever get a chance to see the Andy Andreas apple presentation, you need to see it because these trees literally are cutting edge as far as wildlife type trees for their disease resistance more than anything else, but also, they're late blooming, and that means the crop is later as well. So, we had a cold spell here about a week or so ago where one night it got down to 26 degrees, and Andy texted me like the next day, and he said, "Hey, your apple trees blooming?" And I said, "No, they're not." And he says, "What was your temperature last night?" And I'm like, 26 degrees. And he says, "Exactly. If those apple trees would have been blooming, we would have lost all this year's crop because that 26-degree night would have froze those blooms, and boom, there goes your crop for the year." And the last year I lost my pear crop because my pear trees are blooming earlier than my apple trees by a little bit. And last year the freeze got all my pears, and I had probably 5% of the fruit on my pear trees this last fall that I typically have. Well, I think that 26-degree night took care of my pear trees or my pear crop again for the second year in a row. So that late bloom date, there's a lot of different apple trees. You could go to your local farm store, your Walmart or whatever, and you can buy these second trees for, discount price, or you can get online and see a number of different nurseries are selling, special deer type fruit trees. But If you watch Andy's presentation, you're going to see the difference. And that's something I cover as well. Just some tips on protecting those trees from different varmints, not just deer, but, rabbits, mice, and things like that like to eat the bark. How to get those trees off to a great start. But, it all starts with the tree and the quality of the tree. If you start with a junk tree, you're always going to have a junk tree. Why not go to the extra mile? If you got to order them through the mail, if you got to drive to Gingrich to pick them up, whatever, 5-10 years from now, you're going to forget that extra effort and that extra expense when your tree is doing fantastic. It's disease resistant. It's producing apples year after year. You're not losing them to early frost and things like that. Guys, you might as well put the effort and the money in right out of the gate and set yourself up for success for decades. And Andy talks about in his presentation, you're planting a tree not only for yourself, not only for your kids, but your grandkids and great-grandkids, because these trees were designed, developed, bred, however you want to say it, to be huge trees that are going to be productive for decades and decades.
Yeah. So, go make sure you're subscribed to the Chasing Giants, the same platform that this podcast airs on. Guys, over the next probably 2 months, we're going to have at least 2, sometimes 3 videos a week of different habitat projects that all of our group is working on. I know I did one on a big clearing, like a 9-acre clearing that Austin Razor went in and cleared out this big food plot, put barriers in, and did a TSI job. So there's all kinds of interesting things that will give your imagination going and be on a lot of resources. And then come summertime, we'll start airing all the hunts from last year. So I think we have like 7, 8, 9 hunts that still need to be released. But for the whole spring, we're going to be more educational about our habitat projects. So I hope you go out and watch that. Speaking real quick before we go to the Osseo break, I talked with Derek Burkholder from the Midwest Sportsman's Classic. So we know that there was a lot of people that couldn't make it to Shipshewana this year. And we had the Legends Roundtable where there were different breakout groups. The plan is when that footage is made available to Chasing Giants, Derek is going to let us play that on here. So this channel, that those of you watching on YouTube. So what we will do is there will be a set release date. We'll let everybody know the date that Bobby Worthington and Joe Miles are on, or you and Al Foster, or the Wenzel brothers. We'll let everybody know what day that's going to be released so you can watch it here. For our folks listening on MTech, we'll also tell you when we will have the audio at the conclusion of the Chasing Giants podcast. So that way, all of you who don't have access to YouTube will still get to listen to all of this later this spring, early summer. So just know, those of you who didn't get to go to Shipshewana, you will be able to enjoy those segments that were recorded from up there. But in the meantime, let's take a quick break from Osseo and we'll be right back.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched, pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit OsseoGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Osseo Gear, prepare to be invisible.
Well, Don, you started I'm not going to call it a baiting post on social media, but I think that you did ask a question because you wanted to see what all of the responses were going to be. And back open the topic of the importance of genetics, age structure, and nutrition, and what makes the biggest impact in wild deer herd. Walk us through this series of posts that you've made. By the time everybody hears this podcast, the final post in this will be out. So let's talk a little bit about how all of this is an interesting topic of conversation for social media and this podcast.
Yeah, well, it started with a comment I made on someone else's post where I said genetics are the biggest or most important of the 3 factors: age, nutrition, genetics. And I got some pushback on that. And I got enough pushback, and from the people that were pushing back, I know a couple of them are pretty knowledgeable people, and I wanted to explain in more detail, but I didn't want to do it in a comment section in somebody else's post. I thought it would be better to engage my followers. And I did it in a series of posts. First, I asked the question, which is more important, to get everyone to chime in on what they thought, age, nutrition, or genetics. And lots of comments that were absolutely accurate, spot on accurate. And I said that I was going to reply with some facts, not some opinions, but some facts. And because a lot of what any of us puts out is opinion. A lot of things cannot be proven. This is a fact, but I wanted to throw out some things that are absolute fact. And it boiled down to one major fact, is that any time that there is a giant buck, and you can call giant whatever you want, 200 inch, you can call it 170. And for the purpose of these posts, I said 170 inches because in the wild, most mature bucks are not going to reach 170 inches. In fact, the vast majority are never going to reach 170 inches, no matter how long they live. They could live till they're 10 years old, and they're never going to make 170 inches. And why is that? Well, they're limited genetically. Every buck in the wild that's ever lived, that ever made 170 inches, did so because he had the genetics to do so. Well, people, would fire back, well, yeah, but he's got to have the age too. Well, not necessarily. And I threw out some examples. And one example was the fact that in the pens, captive deer today is fairly common for 200-inch yearlings. And people, pushed back on that. That's in a pen, that's not in the wild. I agree 100%. I think some people miss the whole point. My point was that it is possible to have a giant without having age. And then with nutrition, there was people that thought nutrition was the key. And there's people to this day that think that the reason there's these giant bucks in the captive pens is because of nutrition. Nutrition plays a role, but without genetics, it never happens. I don't care if they're in a pen. I don't care what they eat. And a good human analogy is how many humans are going to grow to be 7 feet tall. And it doesn't matter what we get fed or how old we live, we're never going to be 7 foot tall. There's nothing that we could be fed, and there's no age we could reach where we're going to reach 7 feet tall unless we have the genetics to do so. And it's the same way with these big deer. There's been giants grown without age, which I just pointed out, and there's been giants grown without nutrition in some areas of the country where nutrition is just terrible, but they've all got the genetics to do so. And one example I threw out on the nutrition side of things was, I had the captive deer for a little over 20 years, got rid of them back in 17, so they've been gone for about 8 years now. But probably 25 years ago, I'm going to guess, I know of 2 bucks in captivity here in Illinois. One of them was south of Effingham, Illinois, and the other one was up by Monticello, Illinois. And these bucks were actually brought into captivity from the wild. So they were found as fawns, little fawns in the wild, and the people, instead of leaving them alone, they brought those buck fawns home and they raised them in little pens. And just to be clear here, everyone, that is illegal. Don't be doing it. If you see a wild fawn, leave the thing alone. But nonetheless, these folks brought these buck fawns home and raised them. And when I got to see both of these bucks in person, and when I seen them in person, the bucks were already mature. That they were like 5, 6, 7 years old, somewhere in there. It's been too long ago. I don't remember their ages. But what I do remember is that both of those bucks were scored in the 180 to 190 range with nothing but wild genetics. And they was in pens that were tiny pens. The one pen was probably not even a tenth of an acre, the one up by Monticello. The one down by Effingham was probably more like I'm going to say a quarter to a half an acre in size. But both of those pens there was no vegetation on the ground. The deer had worn them pens down to nothing but bare dirt. And those deer were being fed really nothing but shelled corn. Now, the one at Monticello, that deer was being fed shelled corn, but also those folks had a garden right next to the pen. And during the gardening season, occasionally, something would get thrown over the fence, maybe a stalk of sweet corn or who knows, tomatoes or whatever.
Cucumber.
Yeah, there you go, that the deer might chew on. No balanced diet whatsoever. I did not see any sign of minerals. It was just pour some shelled corn out in a pan and once a day or whatever, and that's what the deer got to eat. The one at Effingham, I did not see anything, as far as the deer being fed from a garden or anything like that. But while I was there looking at that, the gentleman that had that deer was pulling branches off of trees. That pen was more of a wooded setting, so the deer was getting some leaves falling off the trees. But the deer had ate every leaf as high as they could reach, standing on their hind legs. They had totally eaten every leaf. But if the guy wanted that buck to come up to the fence where he could see it, basically just right across the fence a foot away, he would rip a branch off a tree and he would stick his arm through the fence, and that deer would come up there and eat the leaves off that branch right through the fence. So that's the only addition that those deer got to the shelled corn. That to me was proof that a deer can grow a giant rack without proper nutrition, because corn is about 7.5–8% protein. And it lacks a lot of the key nutrients that we want to give our deer today if we're trying to, provide proper nutrition. But yet those two deer still had the genetics to produce what I would call giant racks, over 170 inches for sure, way better than the average wild buck is ever going to have. They did it with very, very poor nutrition. So, as land managers, I'll be the first to tell you, yeah, we want to provide the best nutrition we can. Yeah, we want to get those bucks up to 5, 6, 7 years old. And age is important, nutrition is important. But guys, it is never going to happen without genetics. Never. You can give them the best nutrition, give them whatever, grow them to whatever age you want, and if the genetics are not there, it's never going to happen. And that's been my point all along. It's blown right over some people's heads. They still want to argue, nope, it's age, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, age is important. That's not what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is you can do it without age. How many there's been wild bucks, 3 years old, a lot of 4-year-olds that have been over 170 inches.
Look at two of your, let's use specific examples in front of you right now on your wall. Mm-hmm. 2 of your 3 200-inch deer you had history with. So start with Smokey. From the time he was, say, 2, walk us through his estimated rack score when you identified that deer through to when you shot him, whether it's 2 or 3 years old.
When he's 2, he wasn't that big. He was probably 120s, maybe, at best. But when he was 3, that's when he blew up. So when he was 3, 4, and 5, then when he was 3 and 4, he would have scored in the 170s. As a 3-year-old, that's a perfect example. I'm glad you brought that up. As a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, he was over 170. I've got his sheds. I didn't have to guess. I've got his sheds. Then as a 5-year-old, he went to 186. Got those sheds. But from 5 to 6, he put on 20 inches and he became 206. But that is a deer that if he would have been shot as a 3-year-old, he was over 170 inches. And it was all about genetics.
He would have been a buck of a lifetime at 3 years old for, let's face it, 95% of deer hunters. It's okay. I mean, we're not criticizing people when we say that, but that is a buck of a lifetime for the vast majority of every deer hunter in the country.
Yeah, and the other thing, it was a great point that I should have thought of and brought up myself, but it was brought up by Jake Hewing, and he said that these true giants, they show their potential at a young age. When they're 3.5, they're going to be a giant. If they're just an average deer at 3.5, they're probably always going to be an average deer. But if they're going to be a true giant, you're going to know it at 3.5. And that was a fantastic point and very accurate.
Let's do the same thing with Mel.
Well, Mel was by far the best wild buck I've ever seen and ever followed. And I followed some good ones, multiple 200s that I did not kill. But Mel was in a class of his own. And, as a yearling, he had that typical 10-point frame. And I haven't seen a lot of 10-point yearlings, but I have seen a few. And he had that. Anytime I see it, I think that buck's got a world of potential. But Then at 2, he went and blew up from that little spindly 5x5 yearling rack to at 2, he was a 6x6, would have scored around 160 inches. Clean 6x6, and that's the year. And he grew so much, it took me a while comparing pictures to realize, hey, that was that good yearling. Because when I first started seeing those pictures when he was 2 in velvet that summer, it's like, what deer is this? I didn't recognize him, and it took me literally weeks before that's the yearling from last year. And so at 2, he's like 160-inch clean 6x6. And I knew he had a world of potential, but then at 3, that's when he blew up. From 2 to 3, I mean, it was just unbelievable. You seen him as a 3-year-old. You and I was hunting my first hunt of that season, and that would have been 19. You and I were sitting in the blind, and that buck walked out of the switchgrass and fed in, I think it was Deadly Dozen in front of us, or Clover or something.
Wait. But you mean he was bedded in switchgrass? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to get...
He was bedded in switchgrass, and we've got the video footage to show him coming out of the switchgrass in the afternoon.
I'm sorry. Sorry. I ruined your moment there.
No, you're right on the money. I think I've got a question maybe that we're going to address that again later. But anyway, unbelievable. And I'd got his picture in velvet that summer, so I knew how big he was. But when he shed his antlers that winter, I found them both. Now, he had busted several tines by the time that I'd found them, by the time he'd shed, but I had enough pictures before he'd busted tines that I could, get a very accurate guesstimate of what he scored, and I came up with 216 gross, and hands down, easily, not even comparable, the best 3-year-old ever that I've ever seen in the wild, and I haven't seen one that even comes close since. But then the next year, he only added a few inches. The next year, he grossed, the year I shot him, as a 4-year-old, he grossed 221. And people ask, well, why didn't you let him go? He's only 4. Well, come on, you're only going to push your luck so far. Actually, the year before, when he was 216, I got a trail camera picture of him on opening morning of gun season, 3/4 of a mile off of my farm, in a place where other people had permission to hunt at 8 o'clock in the morning, opening morning gun season, broad daylight. I've got pictures of him out walking around, and I thought there's no way he lived, and God was looking out for me, I guess, because he did. And I rolled the dice that season, but I was not ready to do it again on the 220 buck that was the biggest.
You're not that lucky. You're not playing the lottery twice.
No, and I mean, he was the biggest buck that I've ever shot and probably ever will shoot. So, why would I push my luck? Ended up being the number 6 typical ever killed by a bow hunter anywhere. So I don't know anybody's going to pass that buck up. But 2 perfect examples of genetics. Yeah. And if you don't have the genes, age and nutrition do not matter.
Well, I hope everyone goes and kind of follows this narrative on your social media pages, because I think it's a fascinating, but if people really want to just strip it down to where people who aren't very smart like me can understand it's all in genetics, but nutrition and age lets you express or defines how much you will express those genetics. So without nutrition, without age, but it can happen in certain. So why would we not, as land managers, try to give those 2 things and then protect what deer get shot at 3-year-olds, where you just said a little bit ago, they start to shine. So to grow those giant bucks, we're providing everything we can, age, nutrition, but then we're being really selective of that 3-year-old. And you might lose one to the neighbors, like you said, and a decision has to be made whether to shoot one or not based on what your goals are. But I don't think people are so quick to argue that they're really lacking the ability to listen to what your point is. So I hope people kind of listen to that segment a little bit more than maybe just firing off a comment on social media when you make a post.
And there was a lot of posts that I consider 100% accurate. And
yep.
And I don't mind a good debate. In fact, I enjoy a good debate, actually. But when people are not open-minded, because a good debate, you should be trying to change the other person's mind by throwing out information. And that's what I was doing here, was throwing out information. Here's why I believe age is not the most important factor, because I have seen young bucks, both in the pen and in the wild, that reached giant status, if you will, without age. And I've seen in the wild and in captivity bucks that did not have the nutrition still reach giant status. But never ever has there been a single buck not reach giant status without the genetics to do so. And if we throw it back to human analogy, if a person has the genetic ability to reach 7 foot tall, good nutrition and age will help them reach 7 foot tall. If either of those are lacking, a person has the genes to be 7 foot tall, but you measure his height when he's 10 years old and he's not there yet. Well, yeah, he needs some more age to reach that. Or if he's malnourished, if he's coming from one of these third world countries where, he doesn't have the nutrition, he may top out at 6'6" or whatever instead of 7 foot. So yeah, they're all three important. I don't want to downplay the importance of age and nutrition, because they are important. But without genes, it never happens. Never, ever, not one single time.
If it wasn't that important, then the livestock farmers would never care about, the breeding programs that they put in place. They'd just change the dietary supplement and let them get to a certain age. If there wasn't genetic, you take horse racing, for example, these millions of dollars they pay to have, artificial insemination from a stud to breed a specific bloodline built to do something. If that wasn't the case, they'd go get some mule and feed it some funky stuff and put them in the Kentucky Derby, but that's not how it works.
I can go back to when I first got to captive deer, and I've had livestock all my life. I mean, literally from the time I was about probably in first grade or so, I've had livestock. My grandparents had the farm, which is my farm today, which was just outside of town. And my brother and I would have either hogs or cattle. My brother kind of lost interest, and I was the one that had the real interest later on as a teenager. But I was really into livestock, and still am to this day, actually. Wildlife and livestock were my two big interests from the time I was a little kid, and they still are today. And I was developing feed rations, and I was reading all kinds of literature on this from the time I was a kid. And when I first got my captive deer, I thought, man, I'm going to be able to grow some giant bucks, because I know about, protein levels and the micronutrients and fat levels and this and that. And I've been feeding cattle all my life, and I'm going to get some deer, and I'm going to just crank up the nutrients in my feed, and I'm going to grow giants. Well, you know what? The first year or so, probably a year and a half that I had captive deer, those things crapped like a Holstein cow on fresh grass, because I didn't understand that a white-tailed deer is totally different than a cow. They need a lot more fiber in their diet and such. I had to start the learning process all over when I got the captive deer. And I'll throw out one other last statement on this topic that I know is going to ruffle some feathers. But guys, I'm telling you, the people that raise captive deer are so far more knowledgeable on average than the average deer hunter. It's not even funny. And I know plenty of people and very knowledgeable people on both sides. But guys, when you're taking care of a captive deer herd every single day, year after year, you learn things about nutrition, vocalization, the breeding cycle, and on and on and on that you just absolutely cannot learn with a wild deer herd.
All right. Well, let's transition to our Higgins Hot Seat segment, brought to us by 360 Blinds. Go to 360huntingblinds.com to check out their new products, including the new Chasing Giants blind. You better move fast if you want to put your name in for one of these bad boys. Production is limited this year. So it's Easter Sunday, Don, and I know people want hunting facts sometimes with this, but I want you to think back to that young guy that was writing Roger Rothar those letters, or drawn out on piece of paper farm maps to Al Foster on the back of the printing machine at work, or very early in your hunting journey, if you will, and have that guy look at you today and say, and we touching back a little bit on the Easter thing, that guy look at you today, which one would he be more surprised about? The fact that you've killed your top 5 bucks average, what now? Over 200 inches, right?
Yeah, around 2, I think.
Yeah, 205. Would he be more surprised that you have $5 averaging 205 on your wall, or that you have gotten to the point where you have a podcast and openly minister to young men and try to share your faith? Which would that young Don Higgins be more surprised about?
Wow, that is a tough one. I did not see that one coming. Huh. Well, I'm going to say probably more surprised about the deer on the wall, because that Christian seed was planted in me as a young child, primarily by my grandfather. And it did not take root for a number of years. When I was that young, late teens, early 20s, hell raising, trouble-making punk kid, that seed had not taken root yet and started to grow. But I think I'm probably a perfect example of, for other Christians, why you should be planting those seeds in others, especially your kids, grandkids, whatever, because you may not see it fully grow. My grandpa passed away before he got to see it really blossom. And I wish he was here today. I wish he could come back for just one day and spend one day with me, to see not only what I've done to his farm, but everything else that the blessings that I've gotten, and hopefully the blessings that I've shared with others. But I think that killing those 5 deer back in those days, a 200-inch deer, I didn't know a single person who had ever killed a 200-inch deer. But I knew my passion, and I knew that what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life is chasing big deer. So that would surprise me as a 20-year-old or whatever looking into the future. It would surprise me to have $5 averaging over 200 inches on the wall, but that's got to be the bigger surprise.
Yeah.
Because
kind of special. We both had such a vital relationship with our grandfather. I know my grandfather, Lester, I've often thought the same thing. I wish he would just come back. He was the one that got me into whitetail hunting. And I think, yeah, I just remember the days of when I killed a deer. He was my first phone call. And to have him, see the progression of all of this, but then also see what we've done in helping people or ministering to people. I think it's the same thing your grandfather would look at us and say. They would probably be more proud of us for that, but they would also pat us on the back for the bucks we've killed too. I mean, that's just how they both were.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I often wonder what it's like to be in heaven, and being in heaven, can you look down and see your family or whatever? And I don't have the answer. I have no idea. Maybe somebody does, but I look forward to the day when I get to heaven and get to hear what my grandpa has to say. Because I've had a lot of neighbors that knew my grandpa, people that knew my grandpa, tell me that, man, your grandpa would be proud of you, or your grandpa would sure be proud of what you've done to his farm, or whatever. And even family members, that have told me that. And I'd just like to hear it from his own lips, because I know when I was a kid and I was doing crazy stuff and getting in trouble and this and that, I know I disappointed him a lot, as I did my parents. I'm glad my parents lived long enough to see me get on the right track. I just wish my grandpa would have, but it's not his fault. It's mine that I didn't get my head out of my butt a whole lot sooner.
Well, because of Easter and the events that happened on the first Easter, we're going to have that assurance. So before we move on to the Midwest Land Group questions, I will tell everybody we had a planning meeting this week for the Chasing Assurance podcast. It is officially a go. I'm really excited. My dad has spun this into ways that I just could have never fathomed, and that's just what he does, being over 50 years in the pulpit ministry, and I am looking forward to connecting all of you listeners to my dad, and he's such a good teacher that we're going to have that podcast release. It looks like by mid of June is when that's going to come out. So I'll make sure we keep his marketing. We got some videos and some different kind of like marketing material that will come out to kind of hype up the show a little bit. We ask that all of you all help share that with, because there's a lot of people that won't have any interest watching one deer hunting related thing on this channel. But there's going to be other people that come here just to see this other avenue of a podcast on, having assurance in your faith and your relationship with God, and what does that look like. So we're really excited about that. We'll be right back for our Midwest Land Group featured questions of the week.
Don't risk your most valuable asset with a part-time agent. Most real estate agents are part-time, working another job, trying to scratch together a few extra bucks in real estate as a side gig. Their inexperience will cost you thousands at closing. Not at Midwest Land Group. They only hire full-time professionals. Their agents are passionate about the outdoors, highly trained, and committed to maximizing the value of your land. If you're interested in selling your land, don't risk it with a part-time agent. Visit MidwestLandGroup.com.
All right, our first question comes from Matt from Lobelville, Tennessee. He says, Don and Terry, thanks for the fantastic podcast. I listen to it every week. On the last episode, Don said he was planting cedar trees on his property for an access screen. My question is, why are you planting cedars instead of giant miscanthus? You've already multiple times said that miscanthus is the best screen. I was just curious why you went with cedars instead. Matt, that's a great question, and you're probably not the only one that's wondering that. And so where this screen is going, it's really right next to my wooded sanctuary. It is an ag field, and that ag field was my neighbor's until just recently. I just purchased that ag field, which allows me to do what I want on the other side of the line now. And there's a situation where years ago on that wooded sanctuary, I put it in a CRP tree program. And that was before there was a lot of deer here, and I was able to on the outside border of that tree planting, I planted 2 rows of white pine trees. Now, I could not get away with that today because the deer would eat those little pine seedlings down, as fast as you could plant them. But what has happened is today those pine trees are 30 or 40 feet tall. They're huge. I mean, they got, 15, 18-inch diameter trunks, at chest high. Huge trees. You easily put a tree stand in any of them. But along the property line, the lower branches of those trees have died off, and under those trees, there's very little understory. So a deer standing there at the edge of the sanctuary under those pine trees can look out across that open ag field and basically see me coming in to get in a tree stand or whatever. So I wanted to screen that area under those pine trees. If I would have planted, and I want to do it as close to the property line or the old property line as possible, because I don't want to give up, 50 feet of tillable ag ground to create a screen. If I was willing to do that, miscanthus would give me a better screen and it would do it a lot faster. But because I want to, save as much tillable ag ground as possible, I'm going to come in and I'm going to put a row of cedar trees on the new property, the new side of the line, but I'm only going to be about, less than 5 feet from the property line. And that's going to screen that open area under those pines. And it's close enough that miscanthus would not do well. The miscanthus would be competing with those pine trees and such that's already there. And it just would not be tall enough or thick enough to really be a good screen. And these cedars are going to take some time, there's no doubt about it, but it's going to slowly get better and better, for the next, 10, 20 years as they screen in. But that's the reason. It's because of the location, and I want to save as much tillable ground as possible and don't want to move out into that field to plant the miscanthus.
We would not want to light that on fire next to your wooded sanctuary either.
Exactly. That's another good reason. We don't want all that fuel right there next to the woods. But great question. And miscanthus is the best screen. I'm telling you, there's nothing better than real-world giant miscanthus for screening. But in this situation, I just didn't feel it was a good fit for what I wanted.
Yep. I think you probably had a bunch of people cringing when you said you were actually going to plant cedars, as many of our listeners probably have them overtaking their farm.
Yeah.
But listen, folks, maybe you need to do a little walk around video, as you guys are planning. I think you picked up the cedars. Is that on the docket for you and Austin to plant this coming week?
It is, yeah.
You've delayed Austin coming out now like 2 weeks
Right.
because of scheduling, but that's one of the things. So keep that phone handy, and we'll do a little episode to kind of lay that out on Chasing Giants TV for everyone. But yeah, great question. I'm sure a lot of people were raising their eyebrows about actually planting cedars when people like I do have them overtaking if we're not careful. So we'll put the next question up on the screen.
This one comes from Andy Yoder from Fresno, Ohio. It says, hey, Don and Terry, I have a question about mineral supplements. I heard a local guy with captive deer say he won't use any mineral supplements for his deer that don't include amino acids. I did some research and could only find one company that included amino acids in their mineral. Supposedly it helps greatly to get the full potential out of all the protein the deer consume during the antler growing season. Do you have any experience using amino acids in a mineral supplement? It seems mineral that includes it is 2 to 3 times as expensive. Maybe it's another race to the bottom kind of thing. If we're all trying to grow big bucks, how much should we be trying to copy the guys who do it for a living? Thank you both for all the free advice you give to all us hunters and outdoorsmen. God bless. Andy, I think we need to start by discussing what is an amino acid. So I forget how many amino acids there are, a dozen or so, maybe more than that. But amino acids are the building blocks of protein. Lysine, for example, is an amino acid. But, to mix them with minerals, I'm not sure I've ever heard that. And we're going to have Dr. Aaron Gaines on probably next week if it fits in his schedule. And that's a good question for us to pose to him. The reason I picked your question is you talked about these guys that do it for a living and, which is captive deer breeders, and should we be listening to them? Well, like I talked about a little bit earlier, I've got plenty of experience on that side of things as well. And I will say that in some aspects, those guys are on the cutting edge of some things, and one of them being CWD and how we're going to manage CWD in the future. But there's also some of those guys that are basically like your average deer hunter. They're looking for the magic bullet or that magic potion that they can feed their deer to make them, make their antler growth just explode. And this might or might not be one of those situations. And that's why I wanted to put this question out there so people make sure to tune in next week, because we're going to discuss this with Aaron. And, Aaron is probably one of the top whitetail nutritionists in the world. He's done wonders for real world and our products, and we're going to talk some about that too. But there's true science behind what he does. He just doesn't come up with crazy ideas in his head and go out to the feed mill and start mixing things up because he thinks it sounds good. He's researching and he's reading other folks' research to take things to the ultimate level, just trying to be the best whitetail land steward that he can on his own farms. But it's not just wild ideas he dreamed up. There's true science behind what he says. And I look forward to hearing what he says about adding amino acids to mineral products. And I'm curious what mineral product you might be talking about that has amino acids in it. But even if they're there, I'm sure that there's, precise levels of those amino acids that should be in there, and probably specific ratios that deer may need more of or twice as much of one amino acid as another. Yeah. I just am not qualified to really give you a solid answer, but I wanted to use your question to tell you to make sure you tune in to next episode, because Aaron is going to answer that question.
What I think Aaron brings to the table in a conversation is he's got the education, the formal education and science side of the captive deer about what concoctions you can put for a deer that gives them the best chance to, again, and express all of the genetic potential, right? Whether that genetic potential is 120 or 200. But what Aaron brings to the table is the wild deer is a very accomplished whitetail hunter. Because all of us as hunters, we don't have the luxury of controlling every piece of morsel that goes into that deer's mouth. So we have to balance some attraction parts to get deer to consume enough of it so that it takes advantage of what we do. And Aaron just brings so much to the table from both sides, the science side that the captive deer breeder's in, but also a very accomplished whitetail hunter that has shot some massive, massive big deer. So having him on, I mean, he's over the years, he's become just such a great friend of ours. Even when he was working for Analogics, we still talk to him because he was such a great guy and great friend that, we've kept in contact with, and he's back helping us again now. So he's not going to promote one brand or one product. He's going to promote the nutrition aspect of the ingredients. And it's really, really going to be great to have him on the show. But back to back, I think we need to talk about micro and macronutrients on whitetail through mineral with Aaron. Mm-hmm. And then the following week, we need to have Mike on from Mike's Mighty Microbes and talk about the micronutrients as it relates to plants, because it's the same conversation when you're putting stuff in the right ratios for the plant to express or the animal to express what its real mission in life is. And you've said it 100 times. The best apple you ever had was the one that was sprayed there, because all of those micronutrients were put into play to make all of it happen. So I think we need to, Aaron said he can be on next week, and then we'll talk to Mike and see if he can come on the week after, because it's amazing how the conversation is very similar between the two.
Yeah, you know, one of the frustrating things for me from the whole land management side of things is that me personally, our group of consultants, Real World Wildlife Products, whatever, we're trying to use real science in all of our products. It's not just marketing nonsense that we dream up at night to sell more products. There is true science behind it. And Aaron is probably, I can't imagine or can't think of who else in the industry has the science side knowledge, but also has the hunting success to go with it. And I was on Aaron's farm with him this spring, did a consultation with him, and I probably learned as much that day as I taught. I was just basically, showing him how I would lay out his farm to kill the bucks that he's raising. And hopefully, he got his money's worth out of that. But the knowledge that he's got, and he's killing big deer already. He doesn't need me to show up to tell him how to kill big deer. He's already doing it.
He's shot giants.
Like a lot of guys that are super serious, they know that they don't know it all. And we're always trying to learn. Aaron is very similar to me in that he's just a student of the whitetail that continues to try to learn more and more and more. And he knows that there are people out there that he can pick up a little tidbit of information from this guy, maybe a little bit from that guy, and all of it together makes him a better land manager and deer hunter. And he's taught me a tremendous amount on the science side of things, without a doubt, on the nutrition side of things. And I think I even surprised him the other day because we was talking about a nutrient within the Maximizer product line, and we was going to increase that nutrient level, and that nutrient needs to be in a certain ratio with another nutrient. I'm not going to get into the details here because I don't want our competition to hear too much, but he was talking about raising that nutrient level, and I knew from learning from Aaron from years back that nutrient needed to be in a certain ratio with another one. And I said, well, how does raising that affect this other one? Do we need to raise it as well? And he's like, hey, that's a great question. And it's a lot of the knowledge that I'm sharing here on this podcast and then, wherever, my articles, whatever, it's something that I learned from somebody else. Now, I might have took it in a different direction, but it's other people that have made me a whole lot smarter, and Aaron is one of those guys.
Yep. So he'll be on next week. Make sure you tune in.
All right, next question comes from Nicholas Workman from Andover, Kansas. He says, I listened to your podcast for a couple of years and have started to kill more mature bucks due to lack of intrusion. My question is, would you consider a watering hole a food source before the rut? Well, Nicholas, I wouldn't consider a water hole a food source, but I would consider it a great place to hunt, and especially in the early season, and especially in the plain states like where you're at in Kansas, where water sources are more limited. Water holes can be great anywhere, and you know a lot of people get the idea that I'm anti-water hole, and because of some things I've said in the past, and I am never anti-water hole, never have been. It's just that sometimes I don't do a very good job fully explaining my position on some topics. What I am against is a water hole that you have to go in and manually fill with water. If you can have a water hole, however it's filled, through a spring, through rainfall, I don't care if you got to pipe it out to the water hole. It's the human intrusion to that water hole that I'm against. And in fact, I am strongly considering putting a plastic water hole near my new 360 Chasing Giants blind. But you guys that seen the video that I posted this winter of the client in Ohio who had tapped into the hillside, and he was using groundwater and piping it into this plastic water tank. That is a fantastic idea. That's one of the best ideas I've come across on my consulting clients' properties in a long time. I forget how cold it was that day I was there. It was, I don't know, in the single digits probably. And that water tank was totally unthawed, no ice on it whatsoever, because that groundwater coming out of the ground, out of that pipe into that water tank, and then the excess was kind of flowing over the edge. It was warmer than the air.
Yeah. Is that field tiled?
Next to me? Yeah, it is, but I'm not sure how well.
Wonder if we could figure out a way to tap into the ground tile on that bad boy.
Well, the problem is the elevation.
Yeah.
I do think that I can get out there into that. You know exactly where I'm going to run the tile. I'm going to run it right out to that field, and I may run it out there for a couple 100 feet and use perforated tile until we get to the woods where I don't want the tree roots to be growing in that tile. Then I'll use solid tile. But once I get out in that field, I'll use perforated tile to allow the groundwater to run into that tile down into the water tank. And for whatever reason, deer like to drink out of pools of water more than they do like a running stream or creek. And I think putting one of those within 20 yards or so of that blind is just another reason for a deer to be there.
Yeah, think about that tile that's right across from your driveway. That thing seems like it runs all summer, and it's just as crystal clear water and cold. I walked over there one time just to feel it, and it was ice cold, but
Yep.
I'm sure it's warm in the, not below freezing, and having something like that go into a water hole would be phenomenal. So,
Yep.
Fortunately, I don't have anything like that. So, but I tell you what, buddy, it's right at an hour now, even though you kind of teased up the switchgrass question. I'm looking at these other questions that you had saved for this week, and all of them take a little bit longer to answer, and I don't want to shortchange these viewers that have submitted these questions. So we're going to hold on to those for next week and use those three, since I'm sure Dr. Aaron Gaines being on the show will take up maybe a little bit more time. So we'll save those three for next week. And you got Austin coming in. I got Al and Joe coming in the evening of Easter, and they're staying for, I think, 3 or 4 days and going to try to kill some birds. But I'm going to tell them, I warned them, I don't know what the deal is, the weather or whatnot, but I haven't seen many birds. I got 4 trail cameras out, and I haven't seen many out strutting yet. So hopefully warm weather next week. It's supposed to be up in the 80s. We'll get the birds thundering for Joe and Al so they get a good hunt. But you're not coming. You're staying back and working.
Yeah, I am. Turkey season has been open here since Monday, and I haven't even went yet, but I've been seeing turkeys here almost daily.
Yeah.
So we got them. It's just with Austin coming in this week, I'm probably not going to hunt this week either, but once he leaves, I may go out. I bought some turkey decoys, even bought a couple turkey calls.
Wow.
I'm going to try to shoot one with my bow. We'll see what happens.
That'll be interesting.
If I kill one turkey on this farm, I'll be happy. I'll probably have it mounted, never shoot another one. From here on out, I'll just take my grandsons and let them shoot all the turkeys.
But who would have thought you would have had a deer property and then turkeys? You never had turkeys up until a couple years ago. It's really interesting how your habitat has adapted over the years. So, but other than that, we'll be back next week. Again, folks, make sure you're watching the Chasing Giants YouTube channel and these videos we're putting out. I think we got and this is off the top of my head, but you got your tree hunting video and you got a public land video, which is quite interesting. That's going to be out this week. So, and hopefully we'll have some footage of Al and Joe turkey hunting. I think Josh Anderson might stop by as he's going through town, but we appreciate everybody's support, and tune in next week for Dr. Aaron Gaines being on the show.
Happy Easter, everyone. See you next week. God bless.
Stay tuned to Ty Miller with Sunday Night Prayer Time.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.
Hey Chasing Giants family, Ty here. I am blessed to get the opportunity to speak to you on what many would say is one of the greatest days, Easter. The truth is, I'm recording this on Wednesday prior, and today was anything but great. I thought back today once we got home and things calmed down. I thought back to when Terry sent the messages out, schedule of the Sunday night prayers, and I was the lucky one drawn for Easter. And I remember I began thinking, I've got to come up with something incredible. I've got to come up with something that's... And I do that almost always, and then it's funny because as the day draws near, I just go to him in prayer more, and he usually leads me down a path that I never planned. And boy, did he do that today. So, God's timing's much more appropriate than mine. I don't necessarily have any of this planned, but I wanted to share with you a story, and it draws back to Easter in a special way, I think. And hopefully I can get through this one and convey it well. Wednesdays, I have a 6 a.m. morning men's Bible study, and it just so happened, God's timing, that today of all days, my wife started having some heart issues. She didn't feel right when she woke up. About an hour later, about the time I'm getting out of Bible study, she texts me. She's like, hey, I'm not doing well. My heart won't get normal. It's racing, won't calm down. She had managed to get my son to preschool, and she's a school teacher right across the street near our house. And I just so happen because it's a Bible study day, when I leave, I go by our house and by the school. Again, God's timing. I was able to rush to her, get her in the car, and get us to the hospital. If I'd have known then what I know now, I probably would have called an ambulance. We get her into her room. Her heart is about 30 to 40 beats higher than the highest threshold they want a resting heart rate to be, and it won't stop. It won't slow down. But then it explodes into a flurry, 100 beats per minute more than where it was even at. And I remember I began freaking out, and then it went away. It was very short-lived. I was like, okay, all right, maybe we're in the clear. And then she said, I can feel it, it's getting ready, and I look up and it starts climbing. And alarms start going off. Next thing I know, there's a doctor rushing in. There's 4 nurses, each of them seemingly having a machine. They're hooking her up with untold number of things. And that's when my wife starts losing it, understandably, And she starts saying, I have a son. I have a son. Sorry. I didn't think about it at the moment. But as I was able to process the day, and they were eventually able to, they had to use medicine eventually, and they had to get her heart rate down, and she's calm. She's sleeping upstairs right now, thank God. And we're going to tackle that one day at a time with the specialist and try to figure out what's going on. But as I sat and reflected, and my phone gave me an alert today that I needed to do Sunday night prayer for Terry. I'll be honest, I debated, hey, I got a lot going on in my mind. I don't know if I'm in the right space. But then I was like, God's timing. All this happened probably for me to share, and I don't know why. But there might be somebody out there. My wife, when she was confronted with absolute fear that something absolutely was going to take her from this life, she was scared. That's where her mind went. It's only natural for somebody to go there in moments like that. It wasn't fear of death. She wasn't screaming, I don't want to die. She wasn't doing anything. She was just calling out for her son. And I can't help but think of a more real, palatable, in-person way in which I got to see just a glimpse, just a kernel of what pure, unadulterated love is. And everyone, that's what kept Jesus on the cross. He could have pulled himself down. He didn't have to stay there. He had the power to pluck himself right off of that cross. But he stayed. He stayed because of his sons and his daughters and the love that he had for them. That love was far above the fear of death and what he was facing. I was going to share the story, tie this into the criminal on the cross. The criminal next to him, who, for as far as we know, had lived a terrible life. But he was God's son as well. And Jesus turned and looked at him and said, surely you will be with me in paradise, after the criminal told him to not forget him and remember him in his kingdom. Where are you at in your life? Have you truly, really opened up your life to the one who created you, to the one who loves you so much that on his deathbed, he was only concerned with you? You were why he went to that cross, and you were why he stayed. Thank God he rose and conquered the grave so that you and I have the opportunity to join him in paradise someday. Would you join me in prayer? Dear Heavenly Father, I come to you an exhausted man this day. One who has stressed today and been anxious today and has at times flirted with drifting into anxiety and stress and despair. But somehow, throughout it all, you did not allow fear to take hold of me entirely. You granted me the recognition to see the love in a moment of tragedy, just as it is on the cross, and just as we should see that in the resurrection. God, I thank you for somehow aligning every single thing to bless me with the opportunity to share this story, and that it may hopefully impact a life, that it resonates with someone. God, I want every single person listening to this prayer right now to know that they are loved, to know that there is a God that loved them so much that he sent his one and only Son. And that Son stayed on that cross because of the sons and daughters of his. He thought of us, and us alone. It kept him there. Let that resonate into our lives. Let that soak into our lives. Let it change our lives. Let this Easter season start a new and deeper faith inside of each and every one of us. Let us acknowledge the fact that he loves us more than we deserve, more than we can ever repay, more than we ever will feel worthy of. And let that drive us. Let that love be the fuel of our lives. Let it change us. Lord, thank you so much for your Son. Thank you for taking upon you every single sin of every man and woman who's listening to this. Taking what we did and undoing it. We thank you for that. We praise you for that. We celebrate that. I thank you for that and so much more. In your heavenly name, amen. I want to close very briefly and speak to each of you. If you are going through something, if there is something happening, reach out to one of us. If you have any line, message Chasing Giants. If you know Terry or Don or myself or anyone, if you ever need a group of men to raise you up in prayer, we will do it. We love you. We care for you. We only want what's best for you. One of the most powerful things today was knowing that I had a bunch of prayer warriors that I could text, and I knew when they said they were praying, they were. We'll be that for you. I love each and every one of you. God bless.